How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and of course in this video we're going to focus on Hurricane Lee as well as other tropical disturbances that could potentially be a concern in the future. But first, focusing on Hurricane Lee right now, taking a look at the water vapor imagery. So we do see that it's still fairly organized. It has weakened significantly over the past 48 hours thanks to a stronger than anticipated amount of wind shear that was in the mid-levels of this storm system. And you could probably tell the wind shear is still over this storm. We're seeing all the clouds primarily drift towards the north, which represents that there's a stronger amount of wind shear coming from the southwest right now that's currently keeping this storm from intensifying even further, or at least maintaining its strength when it was a Category 5 hurricane, which certainly good news. However, it's still a major hurricane at the time of this recording. Its wind speed is hovering around 120 miles per hour, and it's only expected to intensify as wind shear winds down, which is certainly unfortunate, before it eventually is expected to weaken once this heads further northward as sea surface temperatures begin to cool down. Here's a look at the current wind shear map over the northern Atlantic, and you could clearly see that right now there's a upper level low that's located just to the north of this storm system that's bringing a high amount of wind shear, as well as an upper level high that's displaced from being above the center of circulation. So it's been beginning to feel the effects of the strong upper level winds associated with this upper level high and this dip in the jet stream. However, if we were to take a look further westward, we see that the wind shear will wind down, and that's expected from the computer models. So it will strengthen most likely back to potentially a Category 4 hurricane. Before, like I said, it's expected to weaken because the wind shear will increase as this heads further northward. The sea surface temperatures will cool down, and plus the wind field typically expands when tropical cyclones continue to head further northward thanks to baroclinic influences now beginning to have an influence on the center circulation, which typically expands the wind field to where the wind speed around center circulation would weaken because the energy is more spread out when the wind field is a little bit larger. But even when it comes to just the magnitude of the wind speed around the center circulation, even if that weakens, the storm will likely still have have the magnitude of, let's say, a major hurricane, even if this were to be categorized as potentially a Category 2 or Category 1 once this heads further northward. It's similar to Sandy. While Sandy technically made landfall as a Category 1 type storm, it was a post-tropical cyclone. Its millibar pressure was equivalent to that of a Category 3 because the wind field was so large and there was so much energy associated with that large wind field that it had the impact of a major hurricane as it impacted the northeast thanks to baroclinic influences. So while in terms of wind speed, this storm will likely weaken once it heads further northward, you still don't want to underestimate it because this will still have a large wind field that could bring impacts equivalent to what you'd expect in a major hurricane. And of course, like I said in the beginning of the video, Hurricane Lee isn't the only thing we're watching. We now have newly formed Tropical Storm Margaret, which currently has maximum sustained winds of 65 miles per hour, and it's expected to intensify into a hurricane. But the good news is that, at least for the foreseeable future, it isn't expected to impact land. So we're going to still keep tabs on it, but definitely not an imminent threat, at least in the near future. And then we have another disturbance, which has a medium chance of developing. The computer models have been trending on developing this, and the forecast is still rather uncertain. There could maybe be the possibility this disturbance moves a little bit further southward to where the Caribbean could get involved in the more long-term future. We're definitely going to keep tabs on that. The GFS model wants to bring this a little bit further southward to the point where it may impact the Caribbean islands. I'll keep you guys updated, and I'll go more in detail a little bit later in the video. And we also have this disturbance, but it has a very low chance of developing. Now, back to Hurricane Lee. Of course, a big question over the past several days regarding Hurricane Lee is who will it impact? Will it impact the Northeast Coast? Could it impact the Atlantic Canada region? Could it impact Bermuda? And taking a look at the latest run of the computer models, let me first start with the GFS model. And taking a look at the latest run of the GFS model, the 18Z run, it's a bit concerning because the GFS model wants to take this storm a little bit further westward, as it expects this trough to move rather quickly to the point and quickly enough to a point where this ridge could be able to build strong enough to a point where it could shift the surface level wind direction from more of an easterly direction, which is typically something that's very rare to see this far up north, where typically the westerly winds dominate much of the northeast most of the year, which is the reason why it's very rare for any sort of hurricane to directly impact the northeast coast. But we're seeing it right here, where this storm comes very close right up along the Massachusetts coast, and it's maybe making landfall if we were to zoom in a little bit right around Massachusetts, and it's pretty much hugging Boston in this scenario, where Boston could experience hurricane force conditions if this were to come for fruition. And moving forward, this moves up the coast up to Maine, where Maine would experience major impacts if this scenario were to be the correct one, as this ridge would be strong enough to steer this just a little bit further west to where it could make landfall along New England before eventually turning to the east, as the easterly winds will enhance once this trough located right over the Midwest strengthens and shifts the wind direction a little bit and weakens this ridge at a point where it'll eventually move east, but it'll still move far west enough to where New England would experience direct impacts. Now, we've been saying over the past several days, unfortunately, there's still a high level of uncertainty regarding the track of this storm. The computer models have been all over the place. There's been computer model runs where in one scenario, or at least in one run, it looks perfect because it would completely not only avoid the northeast, but even Atlantic Canada. There's been some model runs where it pretty much just takes Hurricane Lee well off the coast, where nobody experiences really any major impacts. But then again, we have other computer model runs like this one wanting to take a worst case scenario for New England. And let me show you guys actually the millibar pressure to show you guys the magnitude of this storm if this were to come for fruition. 970 millibars just off the Massachusetts coast. Now, in terms of sheer millibar pressure, if this were a typical hurricane, this will be hovering around category 2 to category 3 strength. Of course, it likely won't be that strong, at least in terms of sheer wind speed, since it'll definitely deal with a lot of baroclinic instability, which will expand the wind shear and pretty much expand the energy to a point where the winds, at least around center circulation, won't be as strong as the millibar pressure would suggest. But in terms of impact, like I said earlier, this would have an impact similar to a category 2 or category 3 hurricane, thanks to how large this wind field would be. And we're seeing heavy rain right over New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and even portions of upstate New York and New Jersey could get involved with gustier winds and heavier rainfall in a scenario like this. And of course, coastal flooding would be likely. And even if this were to be well offshore, this is a powerful storm. So even if the eye doesn't directly impact New England, there could be localized areas where you do experience coastal flooding, especially around high tide. So definitely keep this in mind, where the key thing, like we've been saying over the past several days, will be how strong the ridge is just to the north of it, and that's been uncertain. We have been seeing a recent trend from the computer models that at least this initial trough will move rather quickly to the point where the ridge would be able to build back. We're going to need to see if that keeps up, but it seems like both the European model and the GFS model expect this ridge to be weak enough to a point and move quick enough to a point where the ridge will build in. But the key thing will be this next trough that's expected to move in right around the Midwest by the Saturday timeframe, September 16th. That will be key because the timing of it, because let me actually show you guys the European model comparing the two right now. Let me show you guys the 12Z run for the more long-term forecast. And moving forward with the forecast, we see that while the European model also agrees that this first trough will exit rather quickly and this ridge will build just to the north of it, it expects this next trough to move a little bit quickly because by the time the GFS model has this trough in North Dakota. The European model has this trough just north of Michigan and Ohio, which is a lot further eastward, and just enough eastward to the point where it would weaken this ridge just enough to the point where New England wouldn't experience direct impacts. Of course, gustier winds and heavier rainfall along the coast would still be likely along the New England coast, but it definitely wouldn't be as significant of an event as what the GFS model is stating. So the timing of this trough will be key, this second trough right here, and we won't really get a good idea until maybe by the middle of this week, right around the Wednesday to Thursday timeframe, once we actually see this trough move closer to the Midwest and really see how fast it'll move by that point. So definitely keep this in mind. This trough will be key in determining who experiences direct impacts. But what I could say with more certainty is that the Atlantic coast of Canada will likely experience direct impacts, because it seems like all the computer models are honing in that it's unlikely that this ridge will be weak enough to a point where it'll completely miss out on the coast of Canada. Likely Canada will experience direct impacts. It does seem like it's going to move far east enough to avoid you guys, since this ridge is just expected to be too strong. So you should be preparing for direct impacts right up along the Atlantic coast. But for New England, still keep tabs on this. Still way too early to panic just yet, but I'll certainly keep you guys updated over the next several days. Now let me show you guys the humidity forecast. We see that the European model also expects this to maintain its strength even as it moves further northward, even as sea surface temperatures drop, because the baroclinic instability will play a role in terms of maintaining the strength of this storm system. So you could still easily experience impacts that would be equivalent to a major hurricane in some portions of Canada and potentially New England if this were to take a track further westward. The wind shear will be strong. There will be plenty of dry air expected just to the east of this storm system, but the instability will maintain its strength. So I don't expect at least that much significant weakening even as sea surface temperatures drop further northward. Some good news regarding the strength of Hurricane Lee will be that the sea surface temperatures, at least over this area, are a little bit cooler than at least compared to the rest of the Atlantic. And that's thanks in part due to Hurricane Lee bringing a strong amount of upwelling, bringing a lot of cooler waters that are that's deeper into the ocean, further upwards, and bringing it up to the point where the sea surface temperatures in a small pocket are hovering below the 80-degree threshold, which could be key in keeping the storm just a little bit weaker if it were to approach New England and Canada. So thanks to Hurricane Lee bringing a strong amount of upwelling right around the Bermuda area, that could weaken this storm as it continues ahead further northward than, let's say, if Hurricane Franklin didn't move through this area. And here are what the spaghetti models are stating at this time from both the GFS and the European ensemble members. We do see that almost all of them take a landfall right around Atlantic Canada, which makes me believe that it's very likely you guys will experience direct impacts from this storm system. And for New England, at least what's good news is that, at least for now, the ensemble members, most of them don't take a direct landfall right over New England, but don't at all be surprised if this changes. Definitely don't take the ensemble members forecast as completely serious. Don't make your forecast cone pretty much off of these ensemble members, because the spaghetti models could shift very quickly between day by day. We could potentially see a shift where the ensemble members move a little bit further westward and bring a lot more landfalls to New England. So New England, still keep tabs on this. Don't stay that hopeful that it'll stay off the coast just because that's what the ensemble members are stating at this point, because it's still relatively far out and a lot could change between now and Saturday of this coming Saturday of this week. So here's the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone when it comes to Hurricane Lee, and we do see the National Hurricane Center does eventually want to weaken this to below major hurricane status, which is certainly good news. But like I said, don't focus too much on the actual wind speed or category of this storm once this heads further northward, because its millibar pressure would be equivalent to what you'd see in a category 3 hurricane. So even if this were, let's say, a category 1 in terms of wind speed by the Friday timeframe, it'll have the strength of a major hurricane. So New England and Canada, don't underestimate this storm just because it's a category 1 hurricane, because it's a lot stronger than what you'd expect for a category 1. And Bermuda is now in the cone, so Bermuda, you definitely need to pay very close attention over the next several days. I will at least expect tropical storm force conditions at this time, and there could be the potential of hurricane conditions if this were to move slightly further eastward. So definitely keep tabs on this storm, and at the very least, prepare for tropical storm force impacts right around the Bermuda area and elevated risk of high waves. So whether Hurricane Lee directly impacts the East Coast or not, or Atlantic Canada, at the very least, you should expect a very high wave risk, where we do see that along the coast, you should expect a high rip current risk, life-threatening rip current. So make sure to stay out the water over the next week, all throughout the East Coast. Just because it's going to be hundreds of miles off the coast does not mean you will be spared by rough surf, beach erosion, rip current risk, as well as potentially coastal flooding, especially along New England, where the waves could be very, very high thanks to the potential of Hurricane Lee moving just to the east of you guys. So definitely keep that in mind up all throughout the coast. In terms of the other tropical disturbances we're watching outside of Hurricane Lee, so like I said with Hurricane Margaret just a little bit earlier, we do see Hurricane Margaret is expected to strengthen quite a bit, as the wind shear should be relatively light, and it'll have a high, not that much dry air to deal with, but it will likely stay off the coast. Maybe Europe in the more long-term future needs to pay close attention, but the forecast is still way too uncertain at this time, so definitely, but at least keep tabs on this right around Europe. It will definitely depend on the strength of this storm. There is that possibility with the cool sea surf temperatures, it could completely weaken, but definitely at least keep tabs on this. And for this next tropical disturbance, which could potentially become Tropical Storm Nigel, this could come uncomfortably close to Caribbean, where Puerto Rico, the Lesser Antilles, Dominican Republic experience heavier rain from the storm system. And the GFS model scarily does want to develop this into a major hurricane in the very long-term future. And what's interesting is that it takes a very similar path to Hurricane Lee. That's still far from certain it's going to happen, but we do see the GFS model does want to strengthen this storm relatively quickly. By Sunday, we see a tropical storm right over the main development region. So Caribbean, definitely you guys need to pay close attention to this possibility. The European model is a little bit less confident that this disturbance will strengthen as much moving forward. We do see the European model mainly expects us to maybe get to tropical storm strength, but moves a lot well to the north of the Caribbean, so you guys wouldn't experience impacts. But the European model just expects the dry air to be a little bit too much for this storm system to handle. However, I'll keep you guys updated. Keep tabs on this right around the Caribbean, because this could potentially become our next hurricane right over the main development region. Anyways, guys, that's it for now. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content like this video if you enjoy it. And make sure to follow my TikTok for more weather content, as I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days regarding these next few tropical disturbances, because we're now in the right around the peak of the hurricane season. So there's a lot to talk about over the next several days. But I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.